warriors. Here we are with Unit 8, Lesson 4. This is stress and anxiety and health. Are you the student here who has 4 different notebooks that are slam full and screaming for your life? What causes you the most stress? This is a question that I like to start this little lesson off with because we need to, kind of evaluate what is that thing that's causing me to feel stressed out. At your age, it's a little bit different than the stressors that I feel, but still totally legitimate in your world and valuable tools for us to learn something from. So hopefully we do that with this lesson. In Unit 8, what we're doing here is, again, talking about stress and health. And just like I said with emotions, stress is kind of a hard one to define. So we'll talk it over in class. I'll have a lot to say about it. But stress is different between you and me. Something that you see as a stressor, something that causes you stress, to me might be something benign. It's not that big of a deal. But that's just our differences in Erickson's stages of life. So it's all about perception. If you remember sensation and perception, perception is how we organize our stimuli into meaningful units. And that's really what a stressor is. So here we're going to talk about the psychological, the physical, and the behavioral reactions to stressors and identify stress reactions. First off, let's identify then again what a stressor actually is and what stress is. As it's defined, it's a person's perception of their inability to cope with a certain event or situation. Notice the 2 things there. Perception, first off. Second is inability to cope. So I feel stressed because I may feel that I don't have the right skills to meet the obligations of the stressor. So what is a stressor? This is the stress-producing event or situation. Now we could fulfill this definition with all sorts of different examples, and we will, of course. How does stress affect our health? Well, in a number of different ways. But first off, we have to continue to identify that there are different types of stressors. And just think about this for a moment, that there is positive stress. Eustress is positive stress from challenges or strivings. So there's things in my life that propel me to do well, to meet those stressors. And then there's distress, which is negative stress. So for me, positive stress might include something like going to bed early, waking up early. I fulfill obligations and goals in a positive way. And this is eustress, having to wake up early. Distress, negative stress is, I don't have a whole lot of negative stress in my life. At least I try not to have a whole lot of negative stress. Maybe right now, rising gas prices, it costs me almost double what it used to cost to fill up my gas tank. So that's a negative stressor. It just causes me to have to adjust some of the things and ways that I live. Sources of stress for all of us really kind of focus on like 4 main key areas, and that includes conflict situations, which of course come from tough decisions in our lives. So none of us really like conflict, but there are opportunities for us to grow from. Our life changes, these are kind of major life changes here, divorce and moving. Some of you have had to live through a move, well, probably even a divorce too. I mean, not your own divorce, of course. Our work environment is always a source of stress unless, maybe we're working for ourselves, whatever. And then everyday sources such as long lines, traffic, smells, noise, environmental stressors such as, 521 traffic can be. Other things, okay, so this is what along the lines of those major stressors. Sources of stress include major life changes such as the death of one's spouse. I'm looking at the social readjustment rating scale. Death of a spouse, a divorce, a jail term, death of a close family member, so on and so forth. Now, where do these numbers come from? These numbers come from Thomas Holmes and Richard Rahe, who measured life changes to determine how much stress will develop. So what these 2 men did was, of course, it's men. They surveyed college-age men in the 1970s and asked them to determine what are your biggest sources of stress. So these are the culmination of white men in their 20s in the 1970s. These are their biggest stressors. Now, I don't know that would change much between white men today, death of a spouse, divorce, but some context, 50 years ago, was their stress different than it is today. So they would have been likely like baby boom generation type guys that are getting surveyed in this. Do they change? Well, you'll find out. You're going to take one of your own to review what is the difference between eustress and distress and give an example of each. So this will be one of your bell ringers coming up here. What's the difference between eustress and distress? I hope that you can do that. Understand that just like an emotion, stress has different components to it. It affects us in many different ways. And we mentioned in the last PowerPoint that conflict situations are one of the main places that give us stress. And there are different types of conflict situations, which is the main reason why it causes big stress, is because there's always like opposing and different motives. Okay, so here you have, well, let's just talk about what each one of them are. So the approach conflict is, think of it this way. You have two attractive alternatives. So I know I'm going to college, and which college is going to be better? Well, they're both attractive. It's an approach and an approach. So two good things. And avoidance is two bad things. So I can run sprints or I can run the mile. Well, I kind of like to do both. So for me, that doesn't have an avoidance. An example for me of avoidance is like doing the dishes or vacuuming the floor. I don't really want to do either, but they have to be done. So avoidance. Approach avoidance is one good, one bad, right? So wanting to do something but fearing or doubting about it at the same time, asking for a raise but fears of being fired. There's a good outcome, there's a bad outcome. I can see if boss is going to meet me, or if they're just going to say, we can find somebody else for your job. Approach avoidance. Here's another example that might apply to your own life. I can go to the football game, or I can stay home and study. Oh no, that would be avoidance, wouldn't it? But it would have, this staying home and studying would have positive outcomes because you're going to be more prepared for the next thing. I don't know why you'd stay home on a Friday night, but hey, we'll come up with different scenarios. Conflict situation, lastly, is double approach avoidance. So here you choose between two or more alternatives, each having attractive and unattractive aspects. So it's double because there's many different scenarios. Example is vacation snowboarding or staying at home for a concert. So there you have a bad outcome and a good outcome. So I always think of the approach avoidance as, one is the approach. I like it. It's a good outcome. Avoidance is, nah. Okay, that makes me think of the what's his name? Drake meme, where